Greetings, everyone. Thank you for joining us today with another episode of the Memories of Plymouth. This is one of the initiatives of the Plymouth Historical Society that we've been bringing you for the past 1, 2, 3, 4 years. It's been a most unusual year for us. How many of us have ever been through a pandemic? So instead of starting off in March or April, as we typically do, we are starting off in August, and today it's September. We're very pleased that we have another person who's agreed to be interviewed, and this is Barbara Coursey, Currier. Barb, thanks you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Louise, for having me. I grew up in Beebe. It was a model community, and people don't understand that today. So I'm very grateful that you have asked me to tell about the growing up years I had in Beebe River.
It's our pleasure. It's our pleasure. We're going to have a series of questions today. The first few, I think, are just in case there's one person in the entire world that has never met you. So are ready to begin. If you would share your full name with us.
My name is Barbara Joan Coursey Currier. I was born July 29th, 1937.
1937. Our audience can figure that one out. We won't go any farther than that. And where were you born?
I actually was born in the hospital that was on the Campton-Plymouth line. I'm not sure if it was called Spear then. I think it might have been just called Plymouth Hospital. And you had a choice. If you didn't have a choice, but your parents had a choice where your birth certificate would read where you were born. And I was born in Campton, and I can prove it because I still have my birth certificate.
Oh my gosh, oh my gosh. And who were your parents?
My parents were Clarence Richard Coursey. He was born in 1894, and my mother was Nettie Elizabeth Leach Coursey, and she was born in 1897. They came from Vermont to New Hampshire for a better life.
A better life. Can you explain that, please, a little bit?
Yes, actually my grandparents came first, and that would have been Frank Leach and Mattie Leach and their daughter Barbara, who had polio, which was unusual at the time, and she died very young. But they originally came to Beebe River because they wanted to have a better life, and then my parents had been poor farmers in Vermont, and they followed my mother's parents over to Beebe River.
I've heard the name Beebe River a lot, so I'm hoping as we go through our interview today, we will be hearing some of your memories.
Oh, yes.
Good, 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 good. Your parents' occupation?
Well, my mother originally started working, originally they were farmers in Vermont, but when they came to New Hampshire, my mother worked in the office for a period of time, and then I think the pay was better in the mill than it was in the office. I'm not really sure about that, but that's what I remember. And so my mother went into the finishing mill, and my father worked in the finishing mill as well. My father was a foreman in the finishing mill, and every one of my family worked in the mill except me.
Except you?
Except me. I never worked in the mill.
And you were married?
I was married, yeah, and I have 4 children. My siblings were spaced out quite a bit. My brother Charles was 20 years older than I. He was born in 1917. My sister was 17 years older than I, and she was born in 1903. My brother Earl was born in 1930, and he was 7 years older than I. So I was the baby of the family.
The baby. Here we are today. And your husband's name?
My husband's name was Richard Lee Currier, Sr. No one knew him by Richard. His nickname was Buzzy. And one day someone called our house and asked for Richard, and one of my children said there was no one there that lived by the name of Richard.
Do you have any idea where the Buzzy nickname came from?
Well, my husband had 8 siblings, and in that family there was all these odd nicknames, like Muggsy Currier, Gumpy Currier, Buzzy Currier. The girls had regular names, and my youngest brother-in-law was Jack. I don't know how he got away without having one of those nicknames.
Let's chat about your education.
Okay, I started school in Beebe River, and my first grade teacher was Ruth Dolby, and she was a first-year teacher. she loved us and we loved her. And in June of our first year with her, she came to us and said that she would not be back the next year. Well, all of us were pretty young, and we were pretty upset that we were not going to have Miss Dolby the next year. And she did get married, and she married Donald Young, who later in life became the chief of police in Plymouth. And a funny situation was when she was in the hospital having her last child, I was in the hospital having my first child.
At the same time?
At the same time. So that was kind of a funny situation. Yeah.
I'm not going there.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Very interesting. Very
yeah.
interesting.
Yeah. So, and when she left, we had Mrs. Oh, golly, I can't think of her name. It's not. It will come to me. And after that, I went into the 5 through 8 grade, and we had Mrs. Gay, who lived in Campton. And while we were under her tutelage, Columbia University came to Beebe River to work with the school children for a week. After we got out of school in June, they came and worked with us for a week. And in their process of working with us, they found a black widow spider in Beebe River. And so they had it verified, and as far as I know, that was the first and only black widow spider that was at least in Beebe River. Could have been more, I just don't know. And then while Columbia University was there, they took us up to Mount Washington and let us ride on the cog railway. So to my knowledge, there's never been another university that's come to our small school, and it was quite an experience for us because most of us would never have got to go on the cog railway at that time. And they always brought us little treats too.
Was it Mrs. Bump? Miss Bump?
Yeah, Viola Bump was my replaced Ruth Dolby. Yeah, and she was a different kind of a teacher.
Well, every teacher has a different style.
Oh, yes, they do.
Yes, they do. They do. If I asked you what are some of your memories during your early elementary years, what might they be?
Well, one thing I always remember was a conservation officer came to our school, and his name was John Dodge. And he was the conservation officer for a very long time, and we all enjoyed him. But you mean, what did we do for activities? Well, one of the things we did during the war years was we would go on field trips, and the teachers would have us pick milkweed pods, and the explanation for that then was they were to support the war effort. And we were told at the time that when the milkweeds opened and they were fluffy, they were used in parachutes. I'm not sure if that's correct, because sometimes people will question me on that, but that was what we were told, that they were going to be used in parachutes. And you know, we had recess and we played hopscotch and tag and all the children's games that children played back then. And then we had a big hill out back that we could slide on, but not everyone had sleds. So some people slid down the hill in cardboard boxes. And you know, you tell children that today and they look at you like, what? But there wasn't a lot of money back then, you know.
Well, I want to know if the cardboard boxes worked.
Oh yeah, they did.
They
yeah,
flew.
I mean, they'd get wet, and then they would not be good. But we all had a great time with them, you know. And we shared sleds. I mean, back in those times, people shared things more than they do now, I think, and probably because money was not very plentiful.
I've got a picture, and I'm going to quickly show it to the audience,
Oh,
if you
that'd
don't
be
mind.
great.
I guess what I'm looking at, and this is Chick Homo, shared this along. I'm the one that ended up with it from my brother. But where would the hills be? There's a road. Let's see.
Yeah,
Where's the road? Coming down here.
You'd come out of Beebe River and go up the hill, going towards Route 175. And when you actually got up on the first flats, the school was on the left-hand side. It was a 2-room school, and there were 4 grades in each room. And the children were expected to help. The higher grades were expected to help the lower grades. And there were things that we did in school then that you probably don't hear about now, like we were taught how to square dance in the basement.
Square dance.
Yeah, we were taught how to square dance, and we had chorus, we had Christmas programs, we had something called box lunches, And during the war, food was very scarce. You couldn't get a lot of things. So one time we were having this box lunch, and my mother was lucky enough to get a banana. So that went into my box lunch. And my box lunch was very popular because there was a banana in it.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'm going to stay with elementary. Did you have friends during that time that you can pop a name with us now?
Oh, sure. I mean, it was a large community, but it was a small community, and the school was small, so really everyone was kind of sort of like your friends. But Pauline Hobart was one of my friends. Nancy Bolton was one of my friends. Nancy lived right next door to me. And Martha O'Shea, who was called Punky, was one of my best friends too. And Joan Osgood. Yeah.
Oh, Punky, if he's still with us, you're going to get an email from him.
No, it was a girl.
It was a girl.
It was a girl, and unfortunately she's deceased.
Okay, okay. Let's see. We're moving from elementary school. You were in Campton. You said there were two schools identical to each other that the Draper Corporation built?
Yes, yes. And the Draper, the one in Campton Village that the Draper Corporation had built was identical to the one in Beebe River. That building is still there now. And of course, Beebe River building is gone, but if you drove to Upper Campton Village, you would see, before you got to the market on the left, there's a building set back from the road a little bit, and that was the Campton Elementary School. Wow. It's served many purposes since then, but it's still there.
Wow, wow. So we move on to high school. You're in high school, Plymouth High School. From what era?
Well, 1951 to 1955 was when I was in the high school, and Charlie Morse was our bus driver. And he showed up at 7 o'clock in the morning to pick us up, and he brought us back at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. He's a really nice man. We all liked him a lot. The bus fee to ride the bus was $2.
You paid $2 a week?
A week to ride on the bus, and he would pick up children all the way from Beebe River straight down to the high school. And that was when the old high school was there. The college owns that property now. But we went to the old high school. It was a 3-story building, and it was a new experience for us outlying people, because we had never had the exposure of all these different rooms to go to, and you went to them on the ringing of a bell. So it was both socially and educationally different than what we had been used to.
And I've had that shared with me from several other folks. Some folks would say the amount of extracurricular activities, sports for an example, they would feed in, but the people that came from Plymouth seemed to have a lot more experience. So the people from the outlying schools had to be exceptionally good in order to play.
Exactly.
So your orientation was a little bit more difficult coming from.
Yeah, because not everybody had cars back then either. You know, my parents would have a car, and then they wouldn't have a car, and then they'd have a car, and they wouldn't have a car, and especially during the Depression years and World War II. So oftentimes, if you wanted to stay after school for one-act plays or basketball or whatever, if you didn't have a ride home, you couldn't do it.
Wow, wow. Who was the principal at that time?
George Zulius, and I believe he came either when I was a freshman or a sophomore, and he stayed at the high school for many years.
Many years.
Yeah.
I still remember a few of my teachers, and I want to know if they were your teachers. Can you share some of your teachers' names?
Oh, sure. Tom Goulart was a shop teacher, but he also taught Civil Air Patrol, which I belonged to. So I got to fly when I was in high school, and actually Sonny O'Donnell worked with him, and Sonny was teaching me to fly. I never did get my flying experience done, but Peggy Frazier was there, Agnes Riley was there, Mrs. DeGrace was there, Bruce Ryan was there, Mr. Jordan was there, and when I worked under Mr. Jordan, I was awarded a 1-week educational trip to Bear Brook State Park.
Can you share?
Yeah,
I don't know anything about it.
Well, it was a conservation program, and 2 children were selected from his classes. Stuart Curtis was the other child, young adult, I should say, that got the scholarship to go, but he didn't go. So that was a different experience for me as well, to go into a camp situation.
I guess I want to go back to the flying. Was every student eligible for this program?
It was an after-school, it was an 8th grade period program, and you had all kinds of selections that you could select. Ballroom dancing was another one that was on the 3rd floor of the high school. Wow. But there was tons of stuff, cooking classes, and a really big spread of things you could do in that last period.
Wow.
So
I'm still going back to the flying. You got an opportunity to fly a plane?
I actually rode in it more than I flew. They weren't supposed to let us fly. I did get a little experience with it, but and Sonny O'Donnell had a friend that was going to teach me how to take off and land, but I never did finish that program.
Still a thrill.
Oh yes.
Still a thrill.
Oh yes. Well, to fly over the area even today, it's amazing how much land is not used in this area and how much water there is still. But back then it was even more. So we had to go to Laconia to get gas for the plane, or whatever they put in. I think it was gas. It might have been something different. I don't know.
You're talking about water, and I'm just thinking the audience is well aware. This is quite a drought that we're going through right now.
Oh yes.
I'm sure we've had others, but there are people out of water in the area, and therefore it's a difficult time for some.
Well, we had the opposite thing happen. We had floods in Beebe River, and it wasn't until Army Corps of Engineers came in and rerouted the river somewhat that Beebe River stopped flooding. But my parents told me, my parents couldn't swim, and they told me one time that the water came up to the 2nd floor in their house, and they had to be taken out of the house in a boat. Why, when you live in a town that has floods, you can't swim? I don't know why they didn't. Everyone went to the school at the time, and everyone stayed at the school till they could get back in Beebe River.
Wow.
So that flood control was a really, really good thing to have happen.
And you finished high school, and you've shared with me that you were the only child to finish high school from your family.
That's right. All of my family worked in the mill, and I was the only one that did not work in the mill, and I finished high school, and then I went to vocational technical school when I was 59 years old.
Excuse me?
I was 59 years old when I got my college education.
And why did you decide to go back to school?
Well, I was working for a bank at the time, and they offered free classes if you wanted to get educated, and primarily in bookkeeping and finance and stuff, but you could take a lot of different courses. And so I took advantage of it. And people used to say, well, people I worked with used to say, why are you still going to school at your age? I still go to school at my age today. What you get in your head, they can't take away.
Oh, I like that. Say that one more time, please, for the audience.
What you get in your head, educational-wise, you can't take away. And I have always liked to learn. I still do. I read a lot, usually from midnight to morning.
That's a bit, oh, I'm not going to ask why. I'm getting there. I think I understand. You had shared with me one time about some of the students coming into Plymouth High School did not walk. They did not have a car, but they came by train.
They did. The Warren students and the Rumney School students, at least those 2 towns, came in by train. And they would come into the train station where it is now and walk up the hill to go to school and then catch the train to go back at night. So they kind of was sort of stuck with not being able to get into too many after-school activities as well.
That's what I've heard from several. And others in the area have shared that they couldn't participate because they had a family farm. And they had obligations early morning and then in the afternoon.
I think back then children had chores that they had to do. And I think those children back in those days are better prepared for life than some of the children that don't have anything to do but to watch television. You know, that's just my personal feeling.
There's something about working on a farm lends itself to a good work ethic. You have to schedule your extracurricular fun activities around those obligations that
Oh, yeah.
and your parents start to rely on you.
Oh, yes, they do. It was a part of your growing up. You had chores you had to do.
Yeah. You had said to me that money when you were growing up was quite tight.
It was. My father told me one time that during the Depression, he would walk from Beebe to Plymouth and work all day for $1 a day. That was the Depression, and of course I was not part of that. But the pay scale was different then too. Like my parents' rent on their house was $4 a week for a 3-bedroom, 1-bathroom house. And that lasted after I left Beebe River. My mother was still paying that minute amount for rent. And I lost my train of thought.
Can you share with me maybe the number of homes that were in Beebe River at that time?
Draper put up 26 full-size houses, 2-room or 3-bedroom houses with 1 bath. And later in the course of my growing up, originally the garages was way over by the logging pond, 2 big long rows of garages. But while I was still home, they started putting garages in right next to your house. So not only did you have a really nice house, and good sized house, but you also had a garage for your car. And the corporation expected you to keep the cars in the garage. That village, when I was growing up there, was so clean and neat. They had a gardener that did all the gardening around.
Wow.
They painted 1 room in each house every year. And there was not only just the houses, there were apartment buildings too, and there was a boarding house for the single men who had rooms in the boarding house, and there was a big kitchen where they took their meals. And then there was a section of houses that was apartments, and they were called the Beehive. And I think it was because there were so many apartments in that unit that it was kind of sort of like a beehive, yeah. And there was old-time names that was in that town that some of the people are still there, you know, or their families are still there.
Could you ever at that time purchase one of those homes?
You couldn't at that time, but when they came up for sale, I begged my husband to let me buy the house I grew up in. And he said, you know, they're going to have trouble with the water there, which later on they did. And he said, no, we're not doing that. But during the period of time after I left, Draper went through like 3 or 4 different companies. And each time a new company came into Beebe River, the quality of life went down. So when you drive into Beebe River today, it's not particularly nice to see. The roads are in bad condition. The store burned. It has not been picked up and taken away or finished burning. Some of the houses are in a sad state of disrepair. But it makes my heart feel good when I go in there that there are several houses that have been restored. And I went up to Beebe River one day. I had a house for sale up there, and not my house, but a house for sale. And I went up one day and I drove around. My parents' house was on the right in front of the pond. We were the 3rd house in. And as I drove by all of these houses that were in sad shape, I came upon my house that I used to live in. So I pulled over to the side of the road, and I'm looking at that house thinking, oh, I'm so happy that someone is starting to do something with the houses. And there were 2 men that were standing outside. So I thought, well, they must wonder what I'm doing here. So I unrolled my window and I said, I used to live in that house. And one of the men stepped forward a little bit and said, I own the house now. And I said, well, the plants that you plant, my mother planted in the backyard, the lilacs and the orange trees and what foliage that I could see from my car, my mother planted. And he said, I'll take very good care of those plants. And I wished I had been bold enough to say to him, I would love to see the inside of the house I grew up in, but I couldn't bring myself to ask him to do that.
Maybe after the interview, he will knock on your door.
That would be really nice, or I'd like to knock on his door.
One or the other. Oh my gosh. Let's just jump a little bit if we can, because I want to stay with high school. Some of the folks that you went to high school with, way back when. Can you drop names for us?
Oh boy, there were so many kids I went to school with there. I came across a picture of Floyd Colby in one of my yearbooks, and of course if I had my yearbook in front of me, I could tell you every single person that was there. But the ones from Beebe River were the ones I was most sure of. I sat behind Mary Finan in high school. Carol Rogers was in my class in high school. Bob Brakey was in my class in high school. Raymond Hickson was in my class in high school. Ann Clay was a senior when I was a freshman. There's just so many people that when I leave here, I'll have a dozen more that I could remember.
Well, that's why we
yeah.
take out our yearbooks
Oh,
occasionally
yes.
and look at them.
Oh, yes. And Bobette Youngman was in school with me at the time, too. And when I first lived in Holderness, our downstairs closet was flooded, and in it, the bathroom pipe broke or something, and it was my yearbook. And I mourned that yearbook for so long, and I asked everybody I could think of, do you know of anyone that has that 1955 yearbook? Well, after Bobette's husband died some years later, and she was moving from her house, she had two, and she gave me one. So that was a really, really nice gift. It was very nice of her to share that.
Oh, that's neat. That's neat. I'm going to go backwards, and you said that you received $3 a week when you were going to high school. And did some of that pay for the bus ride in?
Yeah,
What did you do with that extra $1?
Well, I didn't like cafeteria food, so I would run down the hill to Newberry's, and I could get a tomato and lettuce sandwich and a Coke for 25 cents. So I quick would run down the hill, get my sandwich and my Coke, run back up the hill. And then I had to figure out where I was going to get another 25 cents for one day, because 2 and 1 equals 3, and there's 5 days. So I was short 25 cents.
Oh my gosh. I'm going to jump to Beebe River still, because the stories, there's so many coming from there. As you said, it was difficult to, money was tight during that time. So you personally, what might you do?
Well, when I was younger, I would pick berries, and I would sell them 10 cents a quart. And you know how long it takes to pick berries, the wild berries, to sell for 10 cents a quart? And back in those days, you got a deposit on bottles, and a big bottle was 5 cents a bottle, and a small bottle was 2 cents a bottle. And our parents would take us out around to places where people might dump bottles, and we would pick up bottles to go to the movies. And the movie tickets back then were 12 cents. 10 cents for the actual ticket, and 2 cents for the, for the tax on it.
And I don't understand, I've never heard that before, a tax on?
Yeah, there were 12 cents, and I don't know why that sticks in my mind, because I wasn't very old when we was going to movies, but it was 10 cents for the ticket and 2 cents for the tax.
Did you have popcorn then?
If we had any leftover money, it was either 5 or 10 cents a box. So that was a real treat, when we went to do that. But that would take care of our going to movies. I picked the berries, and inside of the bobbins, there was an insert of copper. And if there was defective bobbins, they were sent to the dump. There was no transfer station then, it was the dump. And the men would burn them, and out of the burning would come the copper inserts. And when the fire cooled down, us kids could go down and pick the bushings and sell them to the salvage man for 10 cents a pound. So that was another way we earned money. And
can we show the audience a bobbin?
Oh, sure.
I think I know what a bobbin is, but if we could get one.
These are the rough bobbins. This was the blank. And it actually started with a square piece of wood that was probably like this and like this. And then it went into the roughing mill, and they cut these into this size. And then they were sent to the finishing mill, where they became more finished. And the bushings would go in the top here. And Beebe River at the time was doing 100,000 bobbins a day. They were the biggest producer of bobbins in the world. So that was, unbelievable. And they not only made the bobbins and finished them. I wish I had a shellac one, because my grandmother was one of the people who used to paint the bobbins after they were all finished with shellac. And of course it was automated, it wasn't hand done. But they also made the boxes that the bobbins were shipped in. And that was a great place for us kids to play, was on the outside landing of the mill, was all these boxes, wooden boxes piled up. And we were not supposed to go there and play. But guess what? We did, and we'd get chased away from there. And in later times in Beebe River, they took on selling lumber as well. And another thing that we all liked to do that we were not supposed to do was run across the top of the lumber piles.
You guys were naughty.
Oh yes, but it was so much fun.
Sorry.
I mean, those were simple things we did. I mean, we didn't do anything that was destructive, but we had a lot of things we probably shouldn't have done that we did do.
Uh-oh. We're not going there.
No.
It seems like Beebe River was a self-contained society in that it included, you said store.
Yeah. My very first job that paid something was in the store. And I don't remember what I was paid, but I do remember that I wasn't old enough to work without a permit. Yeah. So we had to go, I think back then you had to go to the superintendent of schools, and he had to approve your working. So I worked in the store, I think all the while I was in high school. And my job originally was to dust and stock shelves. And I wanted to work in the post office so bad. The post office was in the same section that the store was in. But I was not allowed to even step into that room. I mean, the post office was really serious business, and it still is. But that was kind of fun to do that, and I kind of had some of my own money, even though I can't remember how much it was. But it was.
If I was in the store, if I was in the store, what might I purchase there?
They had everything. They had men's clothing, they had women's clothing, they had candies. And my grandmother would save egg boxes for me so I could this was before I worked there, so I could take them to the store and they would take the egg boxes and give me a piece of candy or two. So, I mean, that was a treasure too. And it just was so self-contained, everything.
Well, you mentioned a store, we've mentioned a school, now we have a post office. Am I missing anything?
Yeah, the nurse's quarters, the nurse's office. The nurse took care of everyone in the mill and everyone in Beebe River. And it didn't matter if you got hurt in the mill, if you got hurt in Beebe River, or whether you was a child or an adult. Nina Roulette was the nurse. And she wore the formal nurse's uniforms that you don't see much anymore. And she was just a treasure. And she and her family lived on the road called Broadway.
Wow. What are you doing now? 2020, what are you doing now?
What I'm doing right now is, I had a young man that I was working with when I was a realtor at another office. And he really, really, really wanted his own office, and he kept teasing me to go and work with him in another office. And I kept saying to him, I'm way too old to open my own office. Well, he talked me into it, and that's where I am still. I opened my office in 2007. I have, at times I've had more employees than I have right now. I have a man who works with me and another broker who works with me. But inventory is very, very short right now. So. And
you would attach that because of the coronavirus? We've had so many people from out of state come here and purchase?
Yeah, our offices were closed for 3 months. We could do listings, we could do showings, and I've seen agencies doing closings on their porch. Because of the virus, you couldn't have people in your office. So we were closed the office was closed for like 3 months, which was not economically very sound for us,
Well, here we are in September. Do you have a lot of listings right now?
I do not have a lot of listings, so anybody out there that wants to list their house, I'd be very glad to talk to them. But I always say to people, where are you going? If you sell your house now thinking you're going to get a lot of money for it, and you don't know where you're going, you might want to reconsider that, because if you sell your house for good money, but then you can't find anything, or you find something that's not as good as what you've got and you're going to pay more money for it, maybe you should wait. And I've reconciled myself that I'm never going to be a rich realtor. I'm too honest with people, and that's okay.
Oh my gosh. But we've never seen the likes of it, people coming in from other states, whether or not this is going to be their primary site, home, or just a second home, perhaps?
I think we're going to see more and more people moving here because they want to get out of the cities. And it's my understanding right now that all the businesses that sold camp, you know, the RVs and that type of thing, they sold everything they had.
Wow.
Because there's more and more people coming here, and if they can't afford to buy a year-round home, they want the next best thing to get out of the city.
And why would I want you as a realtor? Why do I want a realtor as opposed to just putting out my own ad? I don't have any background on that at all.
What happens with real estate is people think that you list a home and you get a check. And that's nothing happening, according to a lot of people, between the time the house is listed and the time it's sold. Actually, as I said, I go to classes all the time because you have to keep up with what's happening in the real estate world. And you have to be knowledgeable, you have to be accessible, you have to take phone calls anytime people call, which we all want phone calls. That's what keeps us going. There's a lot more to it, and especially the legalities and the technological stuff that's going on today. Every time we turn around, there's a new program from the Real Estate Commission or from anyone that's working in it. So it's a lot of work, but it's a lot of fun, and you gain a lot of friends. And I like people, and you have to like people, and you have to be knowledgeable.
Oh, thank you for that insight.
Yeah, and you have to keep smiling.
No matter what, service industry.
Yeah.
A lot of people in the area remember your brother who passed away recently. Can you talk about Earl at all?
I can tell you I loved him so very much. He and I were the closest because of the age differences. And he was a salesman for Snell Auto Parts for a lot of years. And then he decided he was going to go in a different direction. So when Skip Guinan passed away, his wife wanted someone that had the same ethics and the same community spirit as what Skip had. So Priscilla and my brother got together and he bought Guinan's dugout. And he was there with his family. My brother's family is like my family. We both have family businesses. And he was there, I don't remember just when he retired, but I would say at least 10 years ago, maybe longer than that. But unfortunately, he developed dementia. And that was very hard on the whole family, as well as very hard on him. And I miss him a whole lot.
That's neat. Thanks. Thanks. I like that. I'd like to ask a lot of questions of you now about the area, and you can pass any of the ones that you want to. But if I said to you the word weather, and weather is this large, we're talking about ice jams, floods. You've talked about that briefly.
Yeah.
What comes to your mind? Really quickly. Don't spend a lot of time on it, but...
Well, what comes to my mind was that they always happen until, the flood control thing came through in Beebe River. While I was in Beebe River, we never had one as bad as the one that my mother and father were taken out in a rowboat. But we did have water come into the cellars, into the first floor. Oftentimes the cans, all the canned goods that my mother had put together, you'd have to throw away, and everyone had a root cellar at that time, and in the root cellar would be potatoes and apples, and canned stuff, and the carrots were actually grown in soil in the root cellar, so you had fresh carrots all the time. There also was always a big keg of cider and salt pork and that type thing, but I get off the track easy here.
No, that was fun. I enjoyed going there, so I'm glad you do get off the track. How about fires?
The one I'm going to tell you about is the hardest one I have. When I was 12 years old, my sister lost her husband and 5 children in a house fire. And I had been playing with those children an hour before that. And my sister had not bought my mother anything for Valentine's Day or for my mother's anniversary because my sister worked for Dole's Mill, as did her husband, and they had been laid off for a long time. And they had us come up to have dinner with the family. And my sister said to my mother, I want to go down to the store with you, and I want to get you something for your birthday and your anniversary. And because my cousins wanted to go too, but it was their bedtime, so because I was kind of sort of spoiled, I got to go to the store with them when the other kids did not. And on the way home, my sister stopped at a friend of hers, Flossie Swetson, and while we were there, the phone rang, and someone said, "Is Peggy there? Because her house is all afire."
So this Peggy is your sister?
Yeah, and we went down, and there was just one wall standing, and
so this is the Smith family, if I remember?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Wow.
And I was 12 years old, and they sent me running up and down the road, knocking on doors, because the neighbor who loved them so much, and he was the first one on the scene, and his name was Romprey, and because the car was gone, he thought that there was no one in the house, and there was nothing he could have done anyway. It was, and I've heard different stories about why that happened. One was that they had a pot burner in the kitchen and one in their living room. And what I was told back then was that maybe one of them went out and the fumes filled the house and created an explosion. The other thing was something about electrical lines going through at the time, and that they might have had something to do with it, but that was never proven. And there never was really what happened that I ever knew. And it totally changed my life. I'd been a very outgoing child, and for a period of time I was not very outgoing. And to myself, I kind of relate that maybe what I was going through was what they call the stress disorder now. But back then, you didn't go to the doctors every time you turned around, you know, whether it was an earache or unless it was a broken bone or something.
So your sister lost a husband and
5 children.
5 children
Yeah.
in this fire.
The oldest boy was 10 and the youngest baby was 2. She had 3 boys and 2 girls. And after...
I want to hold your hand right now. Wow.
Well,
Wow.
after the fire, the kids went to the Thornton school, and the teacher brought things down to my sister. And one of the things that the oldest boy had been doing was copying the Bible. And my sister had no idea that he was doing that.
Wow.
It was a very hard time.
And it still has to be for you, right?
It is.
Yeah.
I have to be careful.
Yeah, I think so too. Let's smile and laugh as opposed to cry.
Yeah, yeah.
Wow. And my next question, are there things that you can remember today touch your heart? And usually we talk about birthdays or weddings or deaths, and that would be one of them right there.
Yeah, and my grandmother was so good to me. I think everybody loves their grandmother, but my mother had me when she was in change of life. She really, it was hard on her having a child at that time. My grandmother was right with me every minute, you know, and she was such a lady, and I'll never forget her.
What was her name again?
Martha.
Martha.
Yeah. Yeah, she was, when she lived in Vermont, pictures of her in Vermont showed that they didn't have much in Vermont. She looked very old. When she moved to New Hampshire, she totally changed because now she could buy some clothes that were more fashionable. And comparing her other pictures with her later pictures, it was totally different. You wouldn't have known it was the same woman.
Wow.
But she had a hat as big as could be.
That's good stuff. That's good stuff. Why don't you talk about, if you would, because I realize 1937, you are over 80. Was there anything special about your 80th birthday?
Oh, yes. My children always give me a nice party, but oftentimes the people that come are their friends. So when I knew I was going to be turning 80, I said to my kids, "You're not giving me a party this year. I'm going to give myself my own party." And they said, "Well, you certainly are not, Mother." And I said, "I am, because I want people in my lifetime that I've worked with or that are friends now or whatever, I want them to come to the party." So they said, "We'll arrange it, Mother." And I said, "Well, I'm going to pay for it." And they said, "No, you're not going to pay for it." So, long story short, I think it was one of the biggest parties that the Elk Lodge has had to date. My son is an elk, and so we had it over there because of the parking, etc. And it was really nice. And my daughter gave me a T-shirt at the time that says, "I'm not 80, I'm 16 with whatever many years of experience." So, and I didn't know that was going to happen.
Do you still have that T-shirt?
I certainly do. I almost wore it today, and then I thought that's a little bit too much.
I think I know what your answer is going to be to this one. Was there someone that was really like your mentor in life, someone that you really cared for? I think you've answered it, but...
Yeah, my grandmother, even after she passed away, she passed away in 1948, so I was still pretty young. But if there's ever anything happened that upset me, I ran to my grandmother's house for a period of time, and I'd go up on the porch, and then I'd realize, oh, Gram's not here. You know, so she was a huge impact on my life. And after my sister lost her family, I kind of sort of became her only child, because she had taken care of me when I was a baby. And the only thing that was really difficult for her was anytime I had a child, she couldn't go to the hospital to see it. It was just too painful, you know. But those two people, and my father was Irish, and I can remember singing the Irish songs many, many times with my father.
You said two people. One's your grandmother.
Yeah.
Who's the other person?
My sister Peggy.
There we go.
And my dad.
And Dad.
Yeah, and
Nice.
our family's always been pretty close.
That's neat. That's neat. You talked just briefly in the beginning, and I don't want to spend too much time because of our clock, but some memories during World War II.
World War II was really hard. Of course, I wasn't very old at the time, but I still can remember that everything was rationed, and you had coupon books, and you had to be very, well, I say you, my parents had to have coupon books, and everything they bought had to be purchased with the coupon. So you had to be very careful that you didn't, run out of coupons.
Sure.
So that the federal government would send us something that looked like lard with a coloring in it, and you had to put the coloring in to make it look like butter. That was one thing I remember. Bananas, vegetables, and meat were very short. You had to be careful. Everybody had a victory garden, and the families worked in the victory garden. At school, we had air raid warning things. The whistle would blow at the mill, and we all had to get underneath our desks and put our hands over our head for the air raid thing. There also was an air raid tower that the men volunteered for and went up with their binoculars to watch for enemy planes. And then, of course, we did getting the plants for the parachute fillings back during that time. And I think because almost every family did their own canning, and my parents would buy a piece of pork, maybe half a piece of pork, half a pig, and some beef, and salt pork, and my mother would cook the meat and can it, and I mean, there was a lot of things that we went without. Simple things that, nylons. Women died to have a pair of nylons. And I can remember that people, I would hear the women talking about, oh, they wish they could get a pair of nylons someplace.
Do we wear nylons today?
Well, most people don't.
What a change.
But the funny thing when my brother and I was growing up is my mother made us wear long brown stockings with a garter belt. And my brother had to wear shorts. And didn't he hate that he was wearing a garter belt and long brown stockings? This is my brother Earl. So yeah, those funny things pop back in your mind.
I think there's so much that you've shared an inkling of Beebe River, and my head is asking me, I wonder if you would consider perhaps in the future coming back and talking more about Beebe River.
I would like to talk to Beebe River as long as someone would listen.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay. All right, maybe we'll put that on our, our list of things to do.
It was such a neat community to grow up in.
That's neat.
And it really is heartening to me to see some people doing the houses over again.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. Did you bring some, can the audience see? Have you brought a few artifacts to share with our audience today?
Yeah.
Why don't we do that if we can?
Okay, well, first of all, this is my husband and myself. Sometime during our marriage, I forget how many years we'd been married, but he died after we'd been married 42 years, and he's been gone 24 years now.
Beautiful picture.
Yeah, thank
Beautiful
you.
Picture.
These are the roller skates that we used to wear to go roller skating in the community hall, and you had to have a key to tighten them up on your feet so they wouldn't fall off. And everybody wore sneakers like this with no treads on the bottom, hardly to speak. But you wore the sneakers with your poodle skirt.
Ooh, can you see the poodle skirt, folks? I'm going to move just a little bit. So it's taken up most of the table. There we go, and there's the poodle there. That's her skirt.
Yeah, and it was worn with what they called a cinch belt, which was like an elastic belt. Yeah, that went on top.
She is prepared.
And you wore a long white T-shirt. There was a turtleneck, and I had a great time. And when I was working at a community bank, they had a 50s day, and I wore my 50s costume, and I took first place. So
let's see what we have.
the milkman delivered milk to the house, and they would come early in the morning, and these caps, when we got up, would be frozen up because the cream would freeze. And it would, when we came down, and my brother Earl always wanted that cream first of all.
Oh my,
Yeah.
and is that from, can you tell if that's
This-
from a
this-
certain dairy? Yes.
Yeah, this is from the Hatch Dairy.
All right.
These are from Burley Farm, and these are very rare to find today because it was my understanding that when Mr. Webster died, a lot of the bottles were destroyed because they didn't want them out. That could be just a story, I don't know.
You're talking Harold Webster?
Frank Webster.
Frank Webster, thank
Yeah,
you. So
yeah,
many Websters.
Yeah. Let me see what else I
What
have
else
here.
do we have? We have a picture
Oh,
of,
That was my high school graduation picture,
mm-hmm,
1955.
your dish.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And
There we go.
that one showed my mother and my father, and again, I think my high school pictures in
Going
that
this
one.
way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the last one.
Let's see, do we have? Oh,
Is it my?
I better show you
it's,
first.
It's
How's
myself and my daughter Kim when she was about a year and a half old.
that? These are neat.
Yeah.
These are neat. Thank
Yeah.
you for doing that.
Yeah.
This has been fun. We are getting close to saying goodbye, but I guess I'd like to ask one more. If you have a group, and I ask this question every time, people are used to it. If you had a group of young adults around you, and they've been listening now, what advice might you share to them in September of 2020?
I think one of the things I would talk to them about is respect for people, for one thing, to listen to people before you interrupt and start correcting them, to not hate people. There's so much hate in today's world, and we have none of the flavor of the village that I grew up in, that everybody worked together, played together. I mean, there was arguments at times, of course, but there wasn't all this animosity that there is today. I think if you can put yourself in somebody else's shoes before you open your mouth to criticize, it would be a much happier world to live in than what it is right now. Neighbors always used to be neighbors. You know, they weren't in your house all the time, but if something happened that that someone needed help, everybody was there to help. We sometimes still see that in some of the smaller villages, but it's not as prevalent as what it used to be.
There is no doubt this is a difficult time that we're going through, but I want to end up with a positive note if we can. Things will get better. Things will get better.
They could always be a whole lot worse. So
that's a
you're right.
good way of saying that, too.
Yeah,
Thanks,
yeah.
Barbara, for
You
coming
bet.
today.
It's my pleasure.
And
Thank you so much.
I'm going to push this up one more time to see if we can get you to come one more time. That would be a fun story, too.
Yeah.
To our audience, thank you for joining us today. We've spoken about a community, and it truly is a different community, that little piece of BB River
Yeah.
and the corporation on the side. We always look back, it's always the good times, isn't it?
Oh, yes.
It's really important that we share our stories and our memories. Some of these should be written down, really important. The one thing that I have learned over the last 4 years is we don't talk a lot with our children, our grandchildren, about our stories that we're trying to save today. So folks, please, 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 if you would take pictures but print them off, because very few of us are doing them, identify on the back, and if there's a story to go along with the pictures, please write it down, because those people in the future will say thank you to you. Barb?
Yeah, could I just say one more thing?
Please.
One thing that I really regret in my life is that I didn't take my mother and her growing up in her whole life, because she grew up in the horseless carriage. We went to the, the car that had the horses were scared to death of. Then she went to airplanes and space travel, and I should have been documenting that, and I did not.
Good advice for these people who are listening today.
Oh, yes.
So we'll see you again with another episode of the Memories of Plymouth. If you know people in their 80s and 90s and 100 that want to share their stories, knock on my door. Thank you, everybody, for listening today, and we'll see you soon.